Okay, so this is a super basic power generation drill. It's very similar to vertical kick in swimming. I would say vertical kick is kind of a higher exploration of this drill, but your stepping is going to be, just allow it, and you're going to be doing this, and the goal is to get the whole back to be swimming, especially during your power stroke, which is going to be something like that. And if you want, the power stroke can keep going, but you'll notice you generate a ton of inertia. So you kind of have a power thing and a braking thing, and so it's feeling and getting the back, and especially places like the neck, having equal, like taking the entire brunt of this motion as you throw the body. Make sure that the whole back is pushing equally, and that it's coming from the spine, right? You could be leg centered and do this, right? Right? That would be a different drill, is to do this with the legs. And so the spiral and the circle motion lets the force be easily picked up and continued, or repeated. So you can really reliably practice the power generation right there with like, let's say that I start wanting to do the drill with the legs. And so this type of thing is really standard. You'll see this in Kung Fu, right? Like basic tensai turns, right? So it's important. You want to get this with the legs, with the feet. It actually gets more and more, like the spine is where you get all the cool, like acrobatic-y stuff. But if you get a ridiculous amount of power generation with the feet, that starts to get crazy. And so people naturally develop this stuff just depending on where their mind's at. That's going to be where they tend to develop their power. Like nerds or like intellectual people actually develop their power outside of their body, right? So there's a spectrum of power development that goes from like up to like lower and lower and lower, and when you start developing power at the feet, that gets weird, much less like below the feet, right? But so with you can just do the circling, like don't get yourself dizzy, or get yourself dizzy and play with tractioning off of that. But I'll go back up to my spine to focus, and obviously like when you're just existing, it's going to be everything all at once, whether you're kind of like tense or relaxed. But it's cool to drill in because you might be missing different segments, so different areas can be turned off. Like we could do the hips, and you'll just notice what type of, how do I get the hips involved in different steps? But as you get up into the spine and the head, that's where you get the flippy. And obviously you can see how, depending on where somebody has ability or athleticism, is going to see how comfortable they are doing flips or whatever. And so you might have like, oh, maybe you're like, oh, maybe I never use that part of my neck to do this. That part of my neck never does this, right? You might find that out. And so if you want to start practicing with long impulses, you're either going to need, like if you're doing this correctly, you're going to need some space, or you can get a pretty long impulse by translating it into a spiral, which is, I mean, that's that rotational thing is mostly why I'm saying this is comparable to vertical kick. It lets you generate massive units of power reset relatively quickly, so you can like study it without necessarily like winding you or gassing you or having to worry about any of the normal stuff. But it to me it kind of makes sense. Mostly like swimming is kind of a back thing, but right, but so is everything. So at first I can say this is a spinal exercise. And so you can practice like, oh, do I have to do that to engage the neck, or can I engage the neck and without looking weird? And once you get warmed up and the blood's flowing enough, it starts to become almost aggravating to break it apart into sections. Right? So if you feel a call towards isolation, of looking at parts, of saying like, oh, I'm working the strength in this area, your circulatory system is likely not high enough, or you're psychotic in some weird way, which is fine, you know. It's like, right? Like bodybuilders are obsessed with this thing. That's psychotic, right? By all measures. And so we all have that. We all have this thing where it's like our movement patterns are psychotic, and that's really similar to bodybuilding versus like developing athleticism or like lifting up objects that have use or value. It's like, oh, you're really strong. Okay, go to a construction site, like help out. Like it's just the gym stuff is psychotic. It's like you don't have any. I don't know. Like, I mean, this is crazy. I'm obviously just crazy, right? I'm sitting here convincing you, like, why am I doing this? And it's like I'm casting a spell on you, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's why. Don't pay any attention to him. Totally normal. Right? Like, a crazy person just doesn't want to explain it to you. Is the only difference. Like, the only difference between the average homeless person and like ultimate love guru master is they just don't feel like spelling it out at the moment. So they're just like, you know. But you can do this in the legs. And with the rotation, it actually lets you do pretty good leg exercise without it being like overtly strenuous, which is usually injurious. Because people think that it's like, oh yeah, the harder I go, it's not. Yeah, it's doing this, but there's no benefit in the whole breakdown and recovery thing. That's not why you get better. The breakdown is just 100% getting in the way. Maybe you're too psychotic or stupid to like apply the pressure without causing the injury or the damage, like that's just a lack of skill. But otherwise you can apply the pressure skillfully and then boom. And so that's the, I mean, yeah, the thing where post-exercise scoreness goes away, it just means you're operating within your skill level, which isn't necessarily like bad. And so my arm movement right now, I'm doing leg focus, right? I'm just practicing with the legs, doing something very similar to this, but doing that with the leg bones instead of the vertebrae. But same feeling thing. And so the arm movements keep my legs in traction with the water or with the flow state. Like this is letting my legs maintain contact with that exertive force, like there in the spine, like that. Hit my head on the fridge, like so the same way that like if I do this, if I don't step, I can't do any more exertive force. It's only if I step can the motion continue, right? So like if you're going to go into whatever metabolic muscular flow state of like, okay, my back's doing this thing, you fire it. The only way to fire it again is to take another step. So with the legs, you fire the legs, but the only way to fire the legs again, since they're swimming, is to move the whole body moves. Since when like doing this drill, the legs are swimming through the body water. So as the legs swim, all the water moves. The accommodation of that movement from the exertion is what most people call like, oh, I'm on balance. That's what's going on, is that the water has moved from the exertion, and so you're accommodating, you're just moving as the water moves and not getting in the way or containing it or anything else like that. So if you're focused on using the legs, whatever they're doing, the legs are still moving all of the water. So your hands have to be active to deal with that movement, or to express it or not get in the way of it. Because if you get in the way of it, it lowers the strength of your legs or their power output in that moment. The same way that like having a bad catch in the water lowers your power output. If you're not doing the correct hand technique as you use your legs, you'll lose catch, you'll lose grab, you'll lose strength. And so like to do the drill, you're like, you might have limited floor space or whatever. So you're just developing these pushes, scanning different areas, and then you can use spirals and rotations to get a good thing and kind of stay in place without having to like do a gazillion mile jog or think too hard about anything. And then this is like if you're doing yoga or some sort of guided thing, same thing's happening. And if you get into it, it's like the class moves you. So if you just do what the instructor says, or you just do what the class does, a lot of the times that'll have you do the same thing if you were actually in flow state. Because if you're you're just listening to the environment, or you're not separate from the environment. So like having an instructor, having a class, having a routine, having a preset plan tends to simulate or put it like if you can't access if this is all invisible to you, then doing the plan is the same as flow state, because it's like you're going along with the currents that are set. So like a solid plan can simulate flow state pretty well, but otherwise so you can have areas turned off, and then you can also have different shells turned off. So like you can have stiffness in the core, or you can have stiffness along the periphery. So it's like you can body scan this way and then also in and out, and you can find areas that aren't swimming, that aren't participating. And so it's usually useful to try and focus in and at least try and get those areas to participate. Not forcing them to move, but get that to participate. It's like you use your movement that you have to find it, and you go, oh, it's not participating. A lot of people want to like push into it or stretch it or load it, and it's like, no. Like look at it and try and move from there, as if you're paralyzed and you're trying to wiggle your big toe. So you body scan, you find areas that are paralyzed, and then you use the movement if you need to stay on it. Because like if you can't move it, as you move, you'll feel it dragging through space. It's like something that you're dragging around instead of something that you're moving with. Like you can find parts of your being that are not breathing, right? And so the way that you look for those is from top to bottom or inside outside. Like those are the two directions. I guess you could do front back. But I think front back is covered by the other two. Yeah, and then finding that, you can use the movement, because it's like you can feel it more maybe while you're moving, but then while that gentle movement you're using just as a tracking aid, then there would be some time spending like trying to get it to move of its own volition, which means is the same as saying my hands move of their own volition. So that like dead part of your spine, which for me is like my entire inner core, yeah, you would try and move from it. And so once you start moving from it of your own volition, that's what you would call like a activation. And so when certain things are activated, like your heart or your brain, instead of being on autopilot of just dragging through space, you suddenly go, I'm moving from here. That's a big deal. And so the same thing happens is like if your leg's paralyzed and you go, okay, it's suddenly like, so it's like if you do this body scanning, anything that you actually take the time and kind of turn on, heat up, bring back to life, resurrect, it can have dramatic shifts in a lot of different ways. And so this stuff is usually tender, right? But if somebody knows what's going on, it just feels awesome to have it ripped out. Different issues. But if you don't know what's going on, the other person's blind, it's like there's all sorts of like weird therapies and techniques. Like usually Usually, since the area is tender and you don't want to talk about it or think about it because it's a weakness, it's more and more and more and more strengths. Great. So like I have, yeah, my back's like super arthritic, and I've just been learning. So like my skill level and my understanding is like whoa, but my back is like super arthritic, so I'm having to like learn some sort of like, I don't know, detox or who knows what is in order. But like left to your own devices, you'll just pursue strengths forever. And it'll get stronger and stronger and stronger, but like the instant that you heal the weakness, the realm of possibilities that opens up becomes like so large that the strength is suddenly like unimportant. It's kind of what happens. It's like the strength only seemed cool because it's like the injury was causing you to be limited to just this area right here. So you're like, oh, I might as well just get really good at this stuff right here. But then if you, and like, oh, getting good at that makes life better and better and better. But if somebody goes, oh, you're paralyzed and you can do this now, hey, look at that. Then it's like this specific strength, maybe not as big of a deal. If that makes any sense. But yeah, that's a power generation drill. You can do it with any area of the body, really. Or it's like, yeah, maybe you're in. Just exercise that memory, exercise that perception, so that this warmed up, poised, like athletic sensitivity becomes like, oh yeah, this is how I always am. This is how I'm supposed to be all the time. This is like the correct posture. You try and memorize that. Similar to like studying or learning any sort of sport or activity like you, that's what it means to like be calm, the awareness. It's like, and for that's hard. Like there's a heavy pressure. There's a heavy storm of forgetting as you get closer and closer to the top. It's like the presence of truth or the presence of God like obliterates the mind, and you're just you forget. And it's like a physical forgetting, similar to aging. Like it's wild. It's like that's what aging is like you forget how to be yourself. So it's like, yeah, there's this intense forgetting. Or it's like you think the memorization would get to be not important as you get older and you learn everything, but it's like, no, that's the most important part. And I'm willing to bet that probably for everybody, the answer to like the problem is just patience and stillness. Like the problem itself has to wake up. So if you're genuinely not the problem, the only thing you're literally like when you're in the source of the problem, it's like that's the body scanning the point where like from there, you are trying to move from there. You are trying to become that. So as you get it, it's like, oh, there's something that hurts, or there's like my body, like I can't move my body. So like, okay, I found my body. Now I try and move from my body that I used to be dragging around. Like I could be dragging around my arms, or they could be participating in my locomotion. So as my arms participate in my locomotion, suddenly they're alive. Or they could be dead. I could be dragging them around. They might not be participating in my locomotion, and therefore they're like inert. So like if I'm trying to heal or rehab something that's become inert, it's like that thing. The reason I'm trying to rehab it is because it's become a problem. Painful. It's like a painful area of the body. So the reason it has to choose to come to life, like, and it has to choose the same way that you choose that in yourself. Like when you're looking at a dead or damaged area, it's like it's right there. Like the only person that's going to inhabit that area if it heals is you. Like if you have a knot or you have a disease or you have an illness, the only thing that's going to get that illness to go away is if you like move from inside of it. Like if you were supposed to be there the whole time, and the reason that there's an illness or a problem is because you vacated that area. Like you vacated the area and it turned into this gross, disgusting mess that you see before you. So if you find a problematic situation in your life, it's like, amen, now you have the ability to bring it to life. How? It's very similar to this drill. I mean, obviously you could play soccer. Or you could go to square dancing. But you could do those things and miss what I'm talking about as well. Impossibly. Power generation, 27 minutes.